Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Michael Richman, a double board certified cardiothoracic surgeon. So I seem to be asked, really almost on a daily basis, why don't peptides get FDA approval? And you're going to get your answer today. And why do they have to be used off-label? First of all, that's not entirely correct. A number of them do get FDA approval for specific conditions like semaglutide or tirzepatide. Okay, the short answer is it's not big pharma's. They're not doing anything wrong. There's no conspiracy. It's that the regulatory challenge for peptide therapeutics is compounded by a lack of specific guidance, because there's guidance for everything to ensure that studies are done right. Sponsors must navigate between small molecule guidelines, which is called ICH M3R2, and biologic guidelines, which is called ICH S6R1, which leads to disparities in interpretation and application. So let's define that in layman's terms. It means that peptide therapeutics exist in this gray zone where sponsors must decide whether to follow a development pathway which is designed for small molecules or those designated for biologics, without clear official guidance on which approach is appropriate for peptides. Now you can answer the question, whose problem is that? Who makes the guidelines? Well, obviously the government. The small molecule guideline governs non-clinical safety studies for small molecule drugs, while the biological guidelines applies to biotechnology-derived pharmaceuticals like monoclonal antibodies, for example. So peptides, as you know, are oligomers of less than 40 amino acids, and they share characteristics of both chemical classes. They're chemically synthesized like small molecules and exhibit immunogenicity and other properties typical of biologics. So what does this do? Well, it creates an ambiguity and practical challenges that contribute to the stalled development of peptides, for example, like CJC-1295, BPC-157, to name a few. Different regulatory reviewers may interpret requirements differently. And so this is where the uncertainty happens, because which non-clinical studies are necessary to get approved. For example, whether genotoxicity testing is required, which species to use for toxicology, how extensively to assess immunogenicity. You see the list goes on, and there's no regulatory framework. This inconsistency increases development costs and timelines, and sponsors may conduct studies that ultimately prove unnecessary or fail to conduct studies that regulators later deem essential. In other words, it costs a shit ton of money. For compounds like CJC-1295 and BPC-157, this uncertainty, combined with the substantial investment required to navigate it, does discourage sponsors, and like I said, big pharma, small pharma, universities, you name it, from advancing through the complete phase 1 through phase 3 clinical trial sequence needed to gain FDA approval or approval by any other body. This lack of harmonized peptide-specific guidance means each peptide development program becomes a case-by-case negotiation with regulators rather than following a well-established pathway. So there you got your answer, okay? Stop at the conspiracies. I'm not going to say whether something works or it doesn't work, because most of the clinical studies haven't been done, and now you understand why. Okay, so you can use things at your own discretion. Would I use something that's not FDA approved? And the answer is no. But like I said, all of you are adults and capable of making your own decisions. So for more information or guidance or consultation, you can go to my website at www.paladinmds.com. And thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.